Okay, welcome back to the Financial Beast podcast, where we show practice owners how to harness the power of the practice, build wealth, and go out at the top of your game. The title of today's topic that we're going to talk about, if you saw it, hopefully you saw it, is the price of expansion. And, it's something that comes up an awful lot. If someone owns a business or a practice, at some point in time, you're going to have to confront the idea or the concept that you're going to have to really look and analyze expansion at some point in time, because there is going to be a point in time where you get to there's only so many bricks a bricklayer can lay. And there's going to come that time in your practice or your business where you're going to have to make a decision. Okay, we are at this level. We have to either decide we're just going to try to stay here and grow incrementally, or we're just going to be like, let's do it. Let's build something massive and costly, but it's going to be a lot of risk. But what's the payoff? And I could not think of a better guest to bring on than Jason Lenhardt. Jason owns, along with his wife, Harmony Hospital in Apex, North Carolina. And they had to make a decision at some point in time with their practice. Are we going to stay at a certain level, or are we going to say, okay, we're going to go big? And what is the cost of that? What are some of the things that they went through? And it's pretty interesting. It's going to be pretty eye-opening. It's probably going to be a little scary for some people in making that decision. But I think at the end of the day, Jason will probably agree that it was the best decision that he ever made. I guess it all depends on the day. That's for sure. But Jason, welcome.
Thank you.
And I think the first question that I want to ask you is that, and I could have just been speculating there, but was there a moment where you and Jodie were like, okay, we got to make a decision here on what we're going to do? Like, what was the practice doing? Like, it was functioning. It was, you had a couple doctors. It wasn't like it was like, a poor performing practice. But what prompted you to make that decision? Like, we're gonna have to expand.
I think it's something that we always wanted to do from day one. We wanted to have a standalone facility, something that was big and beautiful and reflected on the outside how we felt our practice was going to be on the inside, even before we opened up our doors. But at the very beginning, all we had time and capacity for, finances for, was a leasehold space. And this is coming off the heels of the 2008 financial crisis. And so we opened our doors in 2009 within a couple of months of signing the lease. So we were able to open rather quickly, but we knew it wasn't going to be our forever place, if you will. We had our eyes on a piece of land literally across the street from where we opened up our original practice that we just dreamed and hoped and wished that we would be able to have someday, because it was a great location. It would be an easy move. It had land for expansion and to grow and to... It's on a corner, and it was zoned properly. So all those things were really in our favor. But we had no idea how we were going to do that or when that would happen. But, several years into the practice, we were fortunate. We expanded very quickly, and we were in a 1,600 square foot space, and we had a lot of employees. We had a very busy clientele, lots, and then you throw in the patients as well, animal hospital. So it was a very tight space pretty quickly. And so we just decided, at some point, it was really time to go and do that. And we went out and we were able to acquire the land and get the loans and do everything we need to do to go into it, because we were crammed rather tight into a very tight sardine can, if you will, in our original space. And so we got to finally fulfill what we set out to do. But it was when it was extremely tight and we literally could not fit in any more people or any more space. We had shelves above doorways. We had pop-up kennels everywhere we could put them. And we really need the space to, if we want to go to the next level, we really had to expand.
So I think the first thing that you experienced was you were at capacity of where your existing facility was, right?
We were.
So
absolutely.
Or pretty close to it, right? So I'll use this as an example, because we'll have people that will say, well, my practice is, operating at 60% capacity, but if I was just over there or over somewhere else, then that'll solve all my money problems. And my contention is that no, you make sure that you get your current facility up to capacity first.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree with that completely.
Would you agree with that? Yeah.
Yeah, I think we were probably
so you guys are people on top of each other,
Yeah, absolutely.
Getting piggyback rides and everything like that. Okay. So that was the first decision. So the first marker was, oh my God, this thing actually works. We have more than enough people and more than enough patients, and now we have to, find this facility. So then, but I mean, there's decisions on how big you can make the facility, right? I mean, you could make it a 4-doctor practice, a 10-doctor practice,
Absolutely.
Like what was like, what were you thinking there? Like, you didn't know, did you know how many doctors that you could find? And did you know how many patients you could see? I mean, why did you build the facility size that you did?
It's a great question because it really is a chicken and an egg situation, or a cart before the horse type of thing, where people ask you, especially the lenders, well, how much do you want to borrow? And you're kind of throwing your hands up and they're like, I have no idea. You talk to construction guys and they say, well, the average per square foot is this, but there is no actual practice, and so it can vary depending on, land development costs. It'll vary depending on the finishes that you use in the building. So it was really just a pluck from air type of thing. And ultimately, we had no idea. We just wanted to be really as big as we possibly could be and trying to check off a lot of different boxes. We ultimately decided to go with a multi-story building rather than spreading out with a larger footprint, because that allowed us to maximize the use of the land that we had. Because we had a doggy daycare and boarding and that sort of thing. So we needed to use the land more for that sort of thing, play yards and such. And so we just went back and forth, and we ultimately, the decision was made when we found out that the loan would only loan us so much, because it was a small business loan, an SBA loan, and they had maximums. So that kind of just made that decision for us. And so they asked,
what were the maximums? Was it like 5 or 6 million?
5 million.
Okay.
And so once that decision was made, it was like, okay, well, that's what we're going to do. We had some idea of what that would be on a monthly payment and all that sort of stuff, but we said, well, if we just need to grow. What we don't want to do is grow too small or build it too small. And as soon as we move in, not have it be big enough. And that's because that's a story we hear over and over and over again, is you go through this whole process. This is a multi-year process. By the time you get in there, it's already too small. And so we actually overbuilt, and we're still growing up into our capacity. We're coming up on 5 years now in our facility, and we still have a lot of capacity to grow into, but it is becoming a bit more challenging. So we feel fortunate that we did do that, and it was tough and it was hard, but ultimately, like you said in my introduction, it was worth it. Absolutely. Yeah.
So tell me, like, the loan process, because, I don't think a lot of veterinarians, a lot of business owners, are that used to, you're used to going to lenders to, find financing for expansion products. That happens. But was it different? Were you surprised by how difficult it was, or easy it was, or did you have to go through multi-lenders to like find one that you really liked, or one that actually approved you? What was that process like?
The process was actually easier than I expected. Pleasantly surprised, only because there are many veterinary specific lenders that are out there to choose from. And so our process really was to find them. And they were introduced to us by our construction vendors. They were introduced to us by other friends that we had, colleagues in the veterinary field. And so we started making phone calls and reaching out and having conversations. And, we talked to, I don't recall, maybe 3 or 4 different lenders. And some had a much more larger corporate type of feel. Others were much more a smaller mom and pop, although they were very, very large, don't get me wrong, but they had just a different cultural feel to them. And we ultimately decided to go with who we did, because it just felt right. They all have access to the same small business administration, SBA loan types of programs. So it was more about which actual lender do you want to go with to borrow the money from, and to work with them to satisfy all the SBA requirements. So it ultimately, it just came down to getting some introductions, making a decision on who we felt was best, and pulling the trigger, moving forward with it.
And did your personal financial condition have much to do with you getting that loan at all?
It did. It did, because there is a personal guarantee portion of
Yeah.
that to some extent, and then there's lots of intricate details to go over. That could be a complete conversation on its own, certainly. But that's where having a lender who's an SBA specific type of lender who's familiar with that. There's a couple different options to go with. Financials are important because nobody wants to lend to anybody else who doesn't have some sort of healthy financial condition, and so they do look at everything like you would look at for just a personal loan. So there's that, but then you have the business side as well. They're looking at your history and your projections and your business plans and all those sorts of things to make sure it seems like a good product for them to loan you.
Yeah. So did you guys have all that like lined out? Like, this is exactly how we want to build this thing. This is where we're going. Did they ask questions of like, because you guys were married, did they get into details like that? I'm just curious, of like, they know boys and girls.
Right. Yeah. It's like anything there, you feel very vulnerable going through the process because they're turning over every stone, like any type of loan. I mean, as you mentioned, we're married. So we have, tax returns, we've got questionnaires we have to fill out. They do ask for personal financial statements where you basically take a snapshot of where you are with all your assets and your debts and your cash and your loans and all these other sorts of things, vehicles, business interests and those sorts of things, retirement plans, all that type of stuff. And you go through the process. And as I mentioned earlier, it really is a chicken and egg situation because it does seem to volley back and forth between what are your plans, where have you come from? Okay, what do you think about this? And they ask a lot of questions that you're prepared for, and other times they don't. And it's not a test so much that you're unprepared or something like that. It's just like, we need to think through that aspect of it a bit more and come up with a plan. And they want to know that you've thought through this process.
Right.
They're not going to hold you to specific performance on what your business plan is, but they need to know what your vision is. They need to know if it makes sense. They need to know if it seems feasible to what you're trying to do. They do look at market data and all the other things in the area that you've really got no control over to make sure it all makes sense. And it is a very long conversation. I should say conversations that happens over many, many weeks and months, and will continue for many years afterwards, just to keep in touch with each other about the whole process and how things are going.
Yeah. You got the stamp of approval. Remember when they said, okay, you got it, right? That was probably a pretty good day, wasn't it? You were like,
it was. They kind of prefaced, they said, but basically everyone gets approved, to some extent. There are going to be maybe some different strings attached and those sorts of things. But there's always that moment of, we knew it wouldn't be an issue, but it is always a sigh of relief to know that, that it was officially approved, the stamp of approval is there, and you're ready to move forward to the next phase, because then it becomes a very wide band of stuff you have to do next.
So can I ask, and do you mind sharing exact how much it was that you borrowed?
We borrowed, just like we were over capacity, we borrowed over the loan amount. Because as all things happen, as cliche as it is, we were over budget. Things were delayed. There were holding costs. There were things we didn't think about. There were, we just, because you don't know. I mean, going through it a second time would be much different. But we certainly we reached the maximum and had to go and seek out some additional mezzanine financing to get us through the next phase, to finish the project. Yeah.
So it was a big number. It was a big number.
It was a big number. It was bigger than we expected.
Yeah.
But I mean, what are you going to do?
Did you? When you're on the hook for that much money, are there points in time where you're just like, honey, what in the hell are we doing? Like, is it, or was it always just like, no, this is the right thing to do?
No, it was always just the right thing to do. The way we approached it was, to some extent, if you build it, they will come. We knew that there would be a ramp up period. We knew that it was going to be several years afterwards where we were just going to be grinding and hustling just to make sure everything goes to plan, goes right. I will throw in there, we opened up the building in 2018, and basically the end of 2018, and then COVID was in between then and now, and so that really was something nobody was prepared for, and so that really, we just some of the stuff got put on hold. Other things forced us to expand faster than we had planned to, but there were certainly times where we were looking at each other saying, what did we do? It's so big. We have a family, we have children. This was like a gigantic new child that had a tremendous amount of needs. We had to grow staff, we had to grow services. I mean, there's so much that we had to do, and we knew that was going to happen. It just, certain parts of it were much more difficult than we expected. Other parts, we seemed to sail through pretty easily. But absolutely, it was a lot of what the hell did we do? But at the same time, it was more of just a venting of just realities. But we knew that it was going to be that way. And the next morning, you wake up rested and feeling better, and you're ready to go at it again, and you're happy with what you did.
What was the hardest part of the growth? Because now you're in this. I forgot how big your facility is. It's like 15 or 20,000 square foot, isn't it? But it's bigger than that.
It's a little over 13,000 square feet.
It's huge.
Of building itself, and it's on 3 different stories. Yeah, so it is quite big. And we came from a facility that was 1,600 square feet. So that was the biggest adjustment, going from 1,600 to 13,000. The cleaning was probably the most difficult transition that we had. I mentioned we had some delays, so we had a lot of staff that we had hired beforehand that we, again, crammed into our sardine space, and kept them going, despite the delays that we had. We had hired additional doctors, we had additional support staff, but at some point we said we can only hire so many people before we're in the actual new space, because I've got nowhere to put them and nothing for them to do at some point. So once we finally made the move, scaling up to our capacity that we could do in the first year or two over there was very challenging. And taking our existing staff, who was used to our operations and such in the smaller space, moving them to a space that was much bigger, was the biggest challenge. It was a huge adjustment for the human component. Definitely was the biggest challenge, because the people that moved over with us were used to a certain type of thing, and what we moved into was completely brand new, and they had a comparison to make. Any staff members that joined us after the move, that's all they ever knew. And so it was no big deal. It was just, this is all they knew, that this is what they had to sort of get trained into. Our staff adjusting to a new space, the amount of cleaning that had to be done until we got some sort of new things in place and such were the most difficult things for us to do in that first year, for sure. We often say that, we joke about it, kind of, not kind of, sort of, where the whole construction process almost killed us, but that first year tried to finish the job, because that first year was absolutely very, very tough for us in making those adjustments. And even for us, not just the staff, but for us as well, being responsible for the growth, being responsible for the monthly loan payment that was due now, being responsible for keeping our clients happy and not falling victim to, you guys have changed, you're too big now, you're not the same, all those sorts of things, was tough in that first year as well.
Did you lose people from moving from one facility to another? Some people that just
Absolutely.
couldn't handle the change. Yeah,
we absolutely did, and we anticipated some of that.
That's good that you did. And I just to make a comment on that, I think people, anytime that you decide to do any kind of expansion, I think in any area of your life, you can just expect that. Just because I've had some experience with this with other people that are like, I want this transition to go so well that I'm not going to lose anybody. Everyone's going to, and it's just not realistic. Like, there's just some people that just cannot tolerate change, and it's not, they just can't tolerate it. So just expect, if you're going to engage in any kind of expansion project, you are going to lose people. You are going to encounter these things that, you're not trying to. No, I just don't think some people can tolerate the change.
That's an absolute truth. It's a guarantee. You're going to lose a significant portion of folks right off the bat, no matter what you do. We spent a lot of time. We had all the staff came over to help with a lot of the designing, to get input and feedback when stuff was on paper, as we were throwing up the walls and that type of stuff, coming over and having them look at it and get excited about it, because some of the complaints were how tight our space was, and now we had all this additional space. And despite all that, despite all the communications, making that move, within the first couple of weeks, we lost our first few folks just because the change was just too much. And again, it wasn't no bad people necessarily. It was just the change was so drastic that it was difficult to adjust to. And we had a wave of folks that we lost, that we kind of anticipated. And then there was a second wave that happened many months later, which we thankfully anticipated again to some extent. And, unfortunately, the show must go on. So we had to continue to hire and train and bring more people into the fold. But it was definitely something that was an absolute, and is an absolute guarantee, is going to happen no matter how well you prepare for it.
Yeah, you
Absolutely.
said something kind of interesting there too. That it does happen in waves, doesn't it? It seems to
Oh,
like
it
happen
does.
like multiple people all at once, and
Hmm.
it really kind of tests your mettle a little bit because it is introverting when all of a sudden lose two, three, four people, and you're just like, oh my god, is it me? Does my breath
Yeah. Well,
stink? Am I being too mean? Like
yeah.
what's the you know
Yeah.
like
I
what's
mean,
the
it
reason? I
certainly
mean,
is. Yeah, yeah, it certainly is that was that way for us, and we know that the staff that we lost, the staff that remained, they had to grieve their colleagues that left the practice, and that's a very difficult thing for them to have to experience. And so now there's new faces coming in; they don't have those same relationships and rapport with them, and maybe they're struggling with the changes that are going on themselves, and they decide that a change is in order, and so they make the change as well for themselves, at some point. And that's kind of that second wave that seemed to happen. You've kind of
yeah,
got the old gang and you got the new gang coming together, and there's things just again don't feel the same as they used to, and because they're not. And so those adjustments are either made by some folks or they're not, and that's a personal decision. And we were able to salvage many, and many we just couldn't. It was just a reality of what happens. There's only so much we could do and we could really take responsibility for. So it was
yeah.
definitely a heartbreaking process, but it was part of that process nonetheless.
What was easy? Like what you said, that some things were hard, but then there's some things that were just kind of simple. Like you're like surprised that it was so easy. Is that like the growth and new patients and that kind of thing? Is that what was easy?
Yeah, the growth in clientele was easier than we expected, and I think part of it is because we now were in a standalone facility, large. I mean, you couldn't miss it, type of thing, as opposed to being in a shopping center. And so
Right.
we had been open since 2009, and we had opened up our practice. What is that? 9.5 years later in the new building, and we had people that became clients that said, "I had no idea you guys were here," and we kind of always chuckle because we'd been across the street for almost a decade. They drove by us, 4 or 5 times a day probably, and despite marketing and advertising and Google reviews and all that other type of stuff, just didn't know we existed. And so there was just a certain amount of growth that was really easy just because people could see us. We were on a corner, couldn't miss this type of thing, and so they're able to become clients much easier. Um, we thought through the growth, and we thought through the design. So another really easy thing was just the flows. Once we kind of got through our initial couple of days, we were really happy with the design that Jodie came up with as the doctor.
Mm-hmm.
It just really seemed to flow. There aren't many changes that we would have done. There's a couple design wise, but certainly that made things a lot easier, the flowing and all of that. And so we're pleased that was as easy as it was as well.
That's amazing.
Hmm.
Okay, so that was pretty. Did you guys change your marketing at all? I mean, did you change? I mean, did you like say, okay, we're going to increase it just to make sure people know that we're here and that we have a new facility? And did it change much, or did you keep it, or did you do much of anything?
Um, Let me think about that. I don't recall there being anything new that we did. I think we just dialed things up, because we kind of had to dial things down a bit because we were booking appointments and procedures and such so far out that it was difficult to meet the demand in an efficient, acceptable type of time frame. And
Mm-hmm.
so in the months leading up to our actual opening, we started to dial things up and really just do more of what we had found had worked for us over the years, and took advantage of the things that were now strengths of ours that were not strengths of ours in the past, meaning the having a beautiful building, having space, having brand new features, and just the things that you have in say your home, because this building now is our home as opposed to a space that we were renting. So it was those sorts of things we took advantage of and made people aware of in our marketing, and then just did more of the type of marketing that we were doing: online ads, Google review types of things, just all the normal stuff that you would want to do to market
Yeah.
and advertise.
Hey, what was your personal life like that first year? I mean, because I'm assuming that both of you were pretty tied to the practice at that point in time, and it was. How'd
Yeah.
you guys like navigate that, like personally? Um,
um Jody and I have always had a very, very healthy, very strong relationship, and understanding that is the most important thing in our lives is our marriage and the relationship that we have with each other. And so that's always just been sort of a North Star for us to point to when things do get tense. She and I both have our respective roles in the business. We're both co-founders and essential owners in the practice. She's medical, I'm more business. So she's got her lane, I've got mine. At the end of the day, it's a medical practice, so she's at the absolute apex peak of that hierarchy and pyramid. But there's been very few times, if any, that I can think of where any one of us had to make a decision unilaterally against the wishes of the other. We would defer to each other on aspects that were, say, my area of expertise versus hers, and many times you would just have to balance. I mean, there's certainly those conversations where patient care was going to be was paramount, but was going to be very difficult from a business side to do compared to some other alternatives, and so we had to just figure it out. No arguments, none of that type of stuff. Just deep conversation, deep respect for one another, being able to take a time out and step away and understanding what the ultimate goals are and the purpose and all of this. Because while this was our practice together, it was part of our household. The household was senior to all that. And so making sure that
Who taught you that? I mean, who taught you that your household and your parent company are more important than the business? That must be like
one of these financial gurus.
Yeah. Yeah. No, but you said, I think you said the two most important things of how you handle that. Both of you were on the same purpose, at least with the organization. Like, this is where we wanted to go. Like, it was like, this is where we're going. And you both understood what your roles were very, very well. And I think if you find the root of, most disagreements and arguments, and then you guys seem to run a pretty tight ship, not letting other people kind of influence you, as far as where the direction that you're going as well. So that's, I think,
absolutely. I think that's well put. I think that's a very succinct way to say it. We just have always been very aligned on these things, which just makes everything else that much easier. Then you focus on how are we going to do this now? Like, how are we going to accomplish this, as opposed to what are we going to do in terms of, we're not aligned on anything. So that makes that a lot easier. And there's times where, I stumble and she picks me up, and she stumbles and I pick her up. And thankfully, we both went through our different phases of that at different times. So we weren't both down at the same time necessarily, or both up at the same time. Probably more up at the same time. But if either one of us was struggling with the difficulties of either the patient care side of things and the personnel versus the financial aspect of it, we could just help each other out and step in, help each other out, that sort of stuff, and just get us through it all.
So, okay, when you had the original facility, the 1,600 square foot facility, which I think you still have the space, right? And you guys keep that.
We do. Yeah, we kept that. We've repurposed it. We still have that space.
But you had how many employees there? 10, 15, somewhere around there?
At the time that we moved, we had about 30.
Okay.
About 30 employees.
But how many do you have now?
About 80.
Yeah. Okay. So that's a big increase.
It is.
What did you learn about yourself, or what improvements did you make as a business person? Like, what did you learn going from 30 people to 80 people, like that you had to do?
Yeah. Scalability. I mean, the things that worked at a certain level just didn't work at a larger level. And not that there was a flaw in the thinking or what have you, but it wasn't scalable, meaning maybe you couldn't train people fast enough. Maybe you couldn't turn things over quick enough or do it well enough because there was just a quantity problem. And so just trying to figure out new ways of doing things. And sometimes when you run into those difficulties, especially if you feel like you don't have enough bandwidth to do what you've been doing, it forces you to look at what you are doing and go, oh my gosh, we've been doing this for 5 years and no one's even looking at it. Like, it's fat we can trim, and so you get rid of stuff that has just sort of become clutter that you weren't even aware of. And that kind of frees you up to figure out, okay, now we have more time and ability to do these other things, but we don't want to just do the same thing. We need to figure out a much better way to do so. And we've had
anything specific that you can kind of think of that you saw that was like, okay, this was a 30-person organization. It's not an 80-person organization kind of thing.
Yeah. I mean, even before we got to 30 people, having staff meetings with that many people all in one place was something that was just very difficult. Now, the idea of having a staff meeting regularly is not a bad idea. In fact, it's a very, very good idea to have. We had to figure out a better way to accomplish what the purpose of a staff meeting was, just in smaller groups. Basically,
I got you.
over time hired many more managers, elevated more of our support staff into coordinator roles or supervisor roles that were a liaison between ownership and management and the hourly staff, the day-to-day guys, to be able to communicate viewpoints and purposes and all those sorts of things in a way that didn't have to wait for a once a week meeting or a once a month meeting, whatever it might be. So we had to have smaller groups to communicate, had to communicate more often, had to duplicate the same sorts of communications more frequently to different audiences so that it could get passed out in a more efficient way. And that was a big adjustment because the staff meetings were a great thing for us to do as a team to just sort of hit the pause button, get together, share a meal, and talk about stuff. And we just couldn't really do that anymore. So we had to figure out new ways to do that in a way that was more efficient and actually would do a better job than the way we had done it. So you go to 80 people, forget about it. I mean, it's even more difficult to do it. So the changes we made allowed that more scalable.
Yeah. When did you realize that you were going to have to introduce a layer of leadership below you? And how did you start looking at that? What kind of because I'm sure you had to go through a number of people to find a really, really good leader, that could lead other people.
Absolutely. So that happened many, many years before we actually moved into the new facility, just because even before then we knew that we just couldn't do it all. When we first opened up, Jodie and I were 2 of the 5 people that opened up the practice with us. So we made up 2/5 of the personnel. And so as we added another, say, front desk person, that became 6. We had more technicians, then we had to add assistants. And as we continued to grow, we had to allow some of our people just in the early years to have some additional responsibility, a lead tech, a lead CSR, client service rep type of person who could start to handle the group. When it was one CSR department of 1, I mean, it was easy to manage. But when that grew to 6 or 7 people because of the different shifts or expanding hours, we needed help. We needed to have somebody who was there day to day, just supervising, if nothing else, the schedule for them. That then expanded into our first attempts to get an office manager while we were still in our original space. We had somebody that was working with us that was ready for some new responsibilities and was dedicated to the practice. And so we allowed her to go ahead and become our first office manager. And she really helped me with just the administrative aspects of the business. Because at that point, I really needed to focus on more ownership stuff, which was loans for the building, the construction process, hiring more doctors, those sorts of things to help with those sorts of things that are just not day-to-day operations. So at that point, we had office managers, we had a lead tech, lead CSR, those sorts of things. And then as we were really starting to see the finish line of going into the new building, we decided we really need to hire a practice manager at this point because we were adding new services. We were adding a pet resort and spa, meaning doggy daycare, boarding, grooming, all those sorts of things, a completely new division that we didn't have before, which was going to need a manager itself. The hospital itself was going from the 1,600 square feet to over 5,000 square feet of space, plus the staff that would be needed for that. And so we were going to have a hospital manager as well. And then we needed someone on top of that to help link all of it together for Jodie and I as the owners to just sort of steer us through the next several years. And we currently have a practice manager and several other high-level executive managers in the organization, but many, many supervisors and coordinators at this point as well. And that was absolutely a right call for us to make prior to us moving into the new building.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. So now you have some core leadership.
We do.
In the organization that's below you and Jodie as well. And
right. Absolutely. And we wouldn't change that because, it gives you some redundancy because things happen. And so having other people aligned at the higher echelons to be able to step into these other roles to help out temporarily, while we get through some tough periods is absolutely essential because while Jodie and I could do it all, we shouldn't. And there's other things that we have responsibilities to do. And if we're doing those sorts of things, we can't be doing the other things. And so it's definitely been a good way for us to grow. And that's part of the scalability too that we talk about.
Yeah. So let's talk about the cash flow and the money lines as well.
Sure.
So, one thing I say to a lot of business owners, practice owners, is that it doesn't matter how big or small your organization is. Number one, it's good to try to spend every flipping dollar that it makes and then some. But obviously the necessity level of the organization is what's going to drive your income. And I I think you can probably attest to the fact that, I mean, you guys are doing, a high volume of production in your facility right now, probably triple more than what you did when you were, at the smaller facility.
Mm-hmm.
But the same principle applies, doesn't it? It's the business will still try to consume it if you allow it. Is my point.
It absolutely will.
Right?
It absolutely will.
Okay.
There's no doubt about that. And the same guru told me about that too.
But there did come a point, though. I don't know when it was. It feels like it was just maybe recently, where it seemed like it was easier now to control the cash flow a little bit, and where maybe you hit that point, I guess, where, because when you first started this thing, now you have this huge amount of expenses, both fixed and variable. And then the production has now exceeded that point where, it's becoming more profitable. But there is a ramp up to that. And, I don't know what that point of, threshold is, but it does happen as long as you kind of persist through it and continue to make sure that you're systematizing your profit draws and everything else.
It does. It absolutely does. Yeah. It's a weird phenomenon that the money will get spent. I mean, unless you tell where it's going to go.
We had plenty of conversations about this throughout the years. You're like, I don't know where it all goes. I got to pull from here. I got to get in here, and it sucks. And it was a point of stress. I remember all that, right?
It was absolutely. It was a perpetual shell game of moving things around and robbing Peter to pay Paul and all those sorts of things, and not being able to get over the hump, whatever that was, because there was a very large break-even point that we opted into, and we knew that we had an ability to do that, but we couldn't take our eye off the ball and had to continue to produce and grow and expand, and we really just had to get started on that, because there were some things that we just didn't know. We had to just sort of pluck from air. We call it a PFA type of thing. Just, I don't know, we should probably put 1% aside for savings. I mean, I don't know how much I have no idea how much we can afford to save, because I feel like I can't save anything, type of thing. Everything is spoken for, but it took some discipline, took prodding on your part, of us to just go ahead and say, listen, just do $500 a month or $1,000 a month for the practice into an emergency fund or whatever it is. And you need to take out this amount of money just because you're going to have to pay taxes on it. I know you feel like you're not making any money, but there's going to be a tax bill. So just do that, spend that, in a way, spend that money. It's not spending in the sense of I'm buying coffees or something like that, but it's got a purpose or a designation. And then, there's industry standards. Your payroll should be a certain percentage of production. Your cost of goods sold should be a certain percentage. Your overhead expenses should be a certain percentage. And so you start working towards those goals, and you see pretty quickly where you're way out of whack and adjustments that you have to make. And so you start to focus on that. And before you know it, you combine that with we've got long waiting lists for appointments and all this other type of stuff that, okay, it's time to hire another doctor and another doctor and another doctor and support staff, and all of those things contribute to more production. You shorten up the amount of wait times people might have for appointments and those sorts of things. And so you start to see that revenue sooner rather than later, which helps you get over that break-even point and eventually start to take a deep breath, because now you're in that sweet spot where everything else that you're doing incrementally is on top of everything you've had to do just to get to that break-even point. And then you can start to incrementally increase your savings amounts and those sorts of things, just to make you give you that warm and fuzzy feeling like, okay, if something were to happen, like a worldwide pandemic, we have a good nest egg there to help us get through the unknown for a certain amount of time. So
yeah, I mean, but it just doesn't happen overnight. And I think this is, the point of expansion is like, I mean, it's years, before you actually, I mean, the idea of expansion is great. You think I'm going to have this practice and it's going to be this big and I'm going to make this much money. And it eventually does happen. I mean, it does. I mean, you guys are getting to that point right now where you're actually starting to see, really recognize the fruit, the time, the money, all those things. But it was years. It was years of
absolutely,
going through it.
I think it absolutely is true, and I think it's worth pointing out to your audience that while like, it's going to be years. It doesn't feel like a prison sentence though, where it's like I'm just going to be a prisoner to this business for years. I mean, there's certainly moments where you just want it to end, type of thing. You want it to be over. You want to get through it, but you're so busy with other stuff. You got your growth. You've got you've got the positive things that are happening. You've got the expansion. You've got your own personal interests and your home life that's happening, and eventually you just look up one day. You're like, oh wow, we've actually been at this place, like this positive place, past this sort of negative place for 6 months, a year, 2 years now, and didn't even realize it, because you were just so focused on everything so close. But you realize that you've been in that spot you've been trying to get to for so long, and there really is sometimes no fanfare. It's just a realization that you have that, wow, in a way we've made it. We can't just sit back on our laurels and hope that it continues on. You have to kind of constantly put energy into it, but it's not at the same level or intensity that you have to get to that point.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about that. I mean, because your lives are a little different right now. I mean, you guys, I think you have a little bit more free time, but you always carved that out in the past to make sure that you spent time, family vacations, and those kinds of things. Now it's like higher quality family vacations and more expensive ones. Which is great, and you should reward yourself. And I think you guys do a good job of making sure that you celebrate and you reward, because you do have to acknowledge your wins like that. But what do you see right now? The challenge, because this is, I forgot what year we're in, like year 5 of the expansion project, year 6, somewhere around there. Has it been that long?
We're coming up on our 5-year anniversary in November. Yeah, a couple of months from now.
So what are the challenges that you face right now? Like, what are the biggest challenges that you kind of figure that you face right now?
Our biggest challenges are, let me think about that. We don't ever want to stop growing. Okay, we have to constantly add growth, and it comes in a lot of different ways. And so we are adding. We've fortunately been able to add 2 additional doctors recently, but that requires a huge ramp up in support staff, to be able to support those doctors when they are joining the practice or about to join the practice. We are at the place where we're having to make some decisions. We had so much space, for us to take advantage of, that we just, there wasn't any scarcity in space. We are getting a little bit scarce in some of our space in the building. And so we're just having to sort of think through some changes and some expansion that has to be done, and shuffle some things around and do that, and make sure that we've got enough depth in our management structure and in everything else to make sure that while we are away, that things continue on the way that they are when we're there. But we've been very, very happy to hand over the day-to-day operational sort of responsibilities and hand the reins over to our executive managers, and allow us to focus more on the ownership stuff, and the strategic planning and those sorts of things that we can for the business. And that has freed us up to pursue other professional interests as well, while at the same time maintaining oversight of our main business, which is the animal hospital there in Apex.
Yeah. Okay. And so there is going to come a point, though, because the building is only so big, right? I mean, it's huge. Do you think there'll be another expansion? Like, what's expansion look like now? I mean, because let's say in 5 years you're like, all right, this thing is at capacity, and what are we going to do? And I mean, I know we've talked about that, but I don't want to share like some of the things that you've been through. But like, what are you thinking right now? Like what does that look like?
Well, we've got a plan for that. It's a plan that we had part of the initial process, and part of the reason that we went sort of vertical in our building as opposed to expanding out laterally is because when you go through the process, you realize that the towns and such have ordinances on how much of your land can actually have a footprint of a building. So we went multi-story so that we could reserve some land that we could build onto. So we do have, as part of our site plan development, approval to build another building on the same site that we have. So we have an ability to build another building that has a, say, 5,000 square foot footprint, and we could do that as a single story or multi-story building as well, because that then keeps us in compliance with what those requirements are. We had to put all the parking in and everything else at the beginning of that, so we have all this parking sort of butting up to just a empty land sort of square, which you might see in like a big shopping center type of development where you've just got these out parcels set aside. So we do have that on site. It would either be connected to the existing building, or it'd be a standalone building, or what have you. But even before we get to that, Eric, I mean, we would increase capacity in other ways. In all reality, we're open 12 hours a day. Okay, that means 12 hours a day we are not open. So there's a lot of capacity for us to grow if we chose to go that route to expand our hours. We could do evening hours. We could become a 24-hour clinic. We could do those sorts of things before we decide to break ground on another building. I don't know that we're in a market where we'd want to take advantage of every opportunity to be open 24 hours a day. There's plenty of clinics that are emergency clinics that are doing that already, but we do have room to expand that way. We're also only open up half a day on Saturday, so we could do a full day. We could open up on Sundays if we wanted to. So there's ways that we could grow in that vein if we wanted to before we decided to break ground. But if we didn't want to go that route and just wanted another building to add capacity and space opportunities for us, and we have that option. We have options. That's the nice thing, is that we have an ability to pick and choose a couple different ways that we could accomplish the same thing. That makes us feel pretty strong and pretty resilient to be able to have that available to us.
I love it, man. I didn't even know about all that, but that's pretty cool.
Well, there you go. I've taught you something more today.
Yeah, exactly. You did. Okay. Well, the question then was expansion worth it? You can answer that if you want to.
It was absolutely worth it. We knew it would be hard. We knew it would be something that we wanted to do. We're very proud of it. It was really, really hard. And there's times even now where we're like, God, it's just, there's so many more problems. Now we have a building that we own, right? I mean, in addition to just the practice exists inside the walls. I mean, it's this sort of, just a nebulous type of thing that exists. It's not really a tangible thing, but the building itself is, and so that's a whole nother set of responsibilities that we have to contend with that we really didn't have to before. While the practice doesn't own the building, we have a different setup for that. It's still our responsibility. The practice is responsible for maintaining it and all those sorts of things. And so that's provided a lot of challenges for us as well. But despite it all, it's part of the long game. It's part of our long-term household strategic plan, and we're thankful that we did it. And some days are much easier than others, and some days are much, much harder than others. But, even if we don't know, what we're going to be able to do or how we're going to do it, we have confidence that we'll just figure it out. We'll take a deep breath, step back, sort of circle the wagons if we have to, and just figure it out. And that's our greatest strength, we think, as an organization, is that we'll figure it out. I'm thankful that my staff, my support staff, my managers, my executives, and my hourly staff all sort of have that point of view as well. It's, it's tough. Yep. Okay. But, the show must go on. We have to figure it out.
Yeah. That's amazing that you have that kind of culture right now. And it sounds like you really like enjoin them into the process as well. Like, so that they felt like it was almost theirs, to some degree. You gave them they were allowed feedback and such. I think that was pretty important that you did that.
Yeah, absolutely. And we continue to invite them into the conversation and pass communications, up and down, back and forth to sort of work through things, because it's no good to accomplish one aspect of what you're trying to do if you're sort of poking yourself in the eye on the other side. And so you've got to have this collaboration that goes back and forth. And sometimes tough decisions have to be made, but I think people understand, and our support staff understands, that the spirit of what we're trying to do is genuine and honest and authentic and in alignment with how they feel naturally. Not everybody that we've hired has felt that way, and we find that those relationships don't last as long as the ones where you just naturally align with people who just share your vision and share the way in which you want to accomplish it. And that just makes things a lot easier along the way, for sure.
Well said, my friend. Okay, we'll end off on that. That was great. Okay. I'm sure if people are gonna like have questions about expansion, of course, I'm not going to give them your email or anything like that. But I'm sure you'd be open to talking with people about that at some point in time. But we'll figure that part out later.
Absolutely.
We'll get you a landing page or something like the Jason Lenhardt expansion. Something.
That'd be great. Happy to help. It definitely has been. It's been an adventure. It's been a process. It's one that we're glad that we did, and we certainly are happy to talk and help anybody who wants to reach for some of that help. Absolutely.
Amazing. Okay. Thanks, everyone. And definitely have Jason back on because there's some other things I really want to talk to him about. But this was the topic we wanted to go over, and it was great. So we'll see you on the next podcast. Be well.
Sounds good. Thank you.